I've written more than 200,000 words, and I can't see a lot of faults, so why don't I just answer some of your questions? 1. Is this book pure Marvel, or does it also include mutants and DC? A. For sure, the movie Mutants has already shown a collapse situation, there is no need to write it, pure Marvel is fine, and it has nothing to do with Warner's DC, and it is impossible for Iron Man to create a story of Batman in the future. 2. In the original book, Odin killed his elder brother before ascending the throne. The protagonist is Odin's younger brother. This person is a bit unstable. A. Before answering this question, I would like to tell you about the origin of this book. Marvel is a huge system: mutants, Avengers, individual hero comics, collective comics, unit universe, multiverse, Marvel events, which is a huge system. Even if the old man was resurrected and asked him to watch Marvel, he was still confused. So, I created this book by focusing on movies, supplemented by Marvel, and combining with Nordic mythology. In the movie, Odin is the image of an elder. Of course, when he was young, Odin didn't have to think about it, he was also a decisive overlord. Of course Odin doesn't like his younger brother, but the protagonist breaks with Odin and kills Odin, which is somewhat impossible. After killing Odin, does Thor still exist? If there is Thor, he must have his father to take revenge. If he does not avenge his own father, this Thor will collapse. Thor is the three giants of the Avengers, but a very important figure. Therefore, Odin used a small pit for the protagonist. Although the two did not like to see each other in the early stage of their relationship, but later, the storyline has some. 3. Odin still has relatives, so what is the matter with adding a younger brother? A. This question, I feel, is similar to the previous question. In my first chapter, there is a passage where the protagonist's father and mother have a dialogue. A lot of people in the royal family have died. That's right, this is the sentence. Many people have died in the royal family. I wrote this sentence very vaguely. Odin and the protagonist may not be the only sons, but some people have already died in the war. As for whether he died in the hands of Odin, it is conceivable. 3. The author doesn't understand anything, and starts talking nonsense after watching 2 movies? The author must not have read a few comics. A. These are the most uncomfortable words I have heard so far. You can question my writing, but you can't say that I don't understand Marvel. I'm a big fan of Marvel. Let me tell you a rambling. In Marvel's comics, most of the comics are unfinished. Marvel's editors will spend different types of comics for the studio's painters, with all kinds of gimmicks. Thanos raised the Hulk as a dog, so-and-so hero slaughtered the entire Marvel universe. Take this as a buying point to reap a wave of quick money, and when the popularity passes, these comics are gone, which is why most of the Marvel comics in the market are unfinished. They have already earned the money, who cares about comics? For this, they also explained that this is what happened in the multiverse, and it has nothing to do with the main universe. A comic has a hero and a character. If the author should read more comics, a real Marvel fan would never say such a thing. Now the times have changed, Duyan, everything is popular, and most people get their Marvel knowledge from these channels. How could I have such a thing at that time? Dragon Ball, Conan, Avengers, we all read paper comics. Therefore, the post-90s generation who are older use this channel. Few Marvel comics have endings, especially those serialized heroes of the multiverse. 4. What is written? I can't understand it. A. Hey, if I directly wrote the timeline of Iron Man, it would definitely be better than this. But I think the story of Odin's unification of the 9 realms is an epic story. I wanted to expand some 9 realms stories based on Norse mythology, but the results were too poor, so I could only stop the car, and only described the first battle and the reunification. Final battle. If new readers don't like to read it, just skip to the beginning of the land in the 2nd volume. You may take the initiative to read the previous story at that time. Because the unification battle is a major event. 5. The ability of the 6 gems is a law, not magic, the author is just making it up. A. The law. Listen to this saying, the law of space gems is to tear space, which is too oriental. If written like this book will soon be undefeated in the East. The magic ability of the space gem is to tear space. This is the past, like a science fiction saying. 6. Divine power. Yu reading www.yuyugonshu.com. The question of the realm of strength. A. This question really wronged me. Originally, I wanted to divide the realm, the stars, the planets, the level of the Heavenly Father, the single universe and so on. After I divided it, it must be easy to write, but the characters can't do it like this. Iron Man's armor strength, Captain America's 5-5 ability, and the power of Scarlet Witch when she is angry, can't be explained by realm alone. There is also Spider-Man. Spider-Man is known as the good helper of the neighbors. Most of the enemies he encounters are some technological monsters, such as Dr. Octopus and Sandman. In the entire Marvel Universe, these are not on the table. Mobs. If the strength is divided, the realm of Spider-Man will definitely be the group that is not very strong. This is undoubtedly a conflict with the saying the great the ability, the great the responsibility. You must know that this sentence is the core of many Spider-Man movies, except for the Dutch brother. Just write that much. I am driving with my friends in Hunan, to send off the last face of the great man of this century. In this era of dancing, being cute, and singing a meow, you can make a lot of money. How many people are willing to calm down and engage in scientific research? Even if they are engaged in scientific research, who wants to choose agriculture that faces the lowest and turns its back to the sky? Mr. is from the 1930s. He has been engaged in agriculture all his life. I don't think such a great man will appear again in the future. Now after 00, have you ever landed? Even if they have been on the ground, do they know when to sow, fertilize, and weed? In this era of excessive logistics, who would risk their whole life in farmland? All walks of life will develop rapidly in the future, but agriculture, hey! On May 24, 2021, I felt inspired on the way to Hunan. Natasha. A man who looked very decadent said to a woman with red hair and blue eyes and a bumpy figure, I have nothing left, let me go get the soul gem. Hearing the man's words, the woman's eyes showed a trace of pain, she bit her lip and smiled lonely. No, Clint, you haven't lost everything, I'm the one who has nothing, I even have my parents' names. Do not know at all. After speaking, the woman jumped directly into the bottomless abyss. But at the moment when the woman jumped off, she turned to look at the man on the ground, she smiled sweetly, just like a charming, Clint, promise me, you must save everyone. The moment the red-haired and blue-eyed woman jumped into the abyss, the barrage on Tauran's phone suddenly became lively, and it could be said that there was a lot of scolding. Damn it, Black Widow just died like this. Black Widow is actually dead, bastard, this damned Russell brother. Yeching not. What? This woman is finally dead, the bus, Old Irons, 666, brush up. Seeing an important character die like this inexplicably, Tauran, who was holding the mobile phone, also filled his chest with anger. He angrily threw the mobile phone out of his hand, but as soon as Tauran threw it out, he immediately regretted it again. This is a new mobile phone he bought for 3,000 yuan. A few days ago, in order to buy this mobile phone, he turned down many friends' dinners and the opportunity to find his love in the alley. Clap coincidentally, Tauran just threw the phone into the water basin beside him, and as soon as he fell into the water, the phone suddenly splashed with water. Tauran's heart trembled, and he couldn't believe his eyes until half a minute later, he cried out in an extremely embarrassed way, I've got half a month's salary. Said it was too late, it was fast, Tauran stood up with a bang, and the speed was amazing, but it was all too late. When Tauran picked up the phone again, he found that the phone in his hand was much heavier than before. Heavy, like a big brother born in the 1980s. Bang Ran was exhausted and sat on the ground at once, and the phone in his right hand also slid to the ground. I'm Iron Man, I am Iron Man. Just as Ran was sitting on the ground, the phone that had been in the water rang again. This English language, which made Ran a little confused, was like a sedative shot into Ran's heart. Ran was overjoyed and quickly took out his phone and checked it again. But as soon as Ran pressed the power button, Iron Man's figure flashed from the phone screen, and then fell into a black screen again. Ran's heart twitched suddenly, and then he fell straight to the ground. Ran, a very ordinary otaku, grew up in an orphanage. Because of some heart problems, no one dared to adopt him in the orphanage. However, Ran is also a good candidate. With the help of the country and good-hearted people, he successfully finished reading a pretty good university. However, because of his own health, after graduation, Ran was not very good. He found an accountant in a factory. Although the salary was not high, it was safe. Ran is a big fan of Marvel movies. When Avengers 4 premiered in mainland China, Ran did not watch the highest-grossing movie in movie history because of limited funds. However, when he learned that the Avengers could be watched on his mobile phone, Ran was very happy for a long time. For this reason, he deliberately replaced the old mobile phone that had been used for 5 or 6 years, and recharged it for the first time ever. Film and television membership. The ups and downs of the plot made Ran exclaim, but the moment he saw the death of Black Widow, his emotions suddenly became intense. In a sense, Black Widow is a person just like Ran, both of whom are also fatherless and motherless. Happy families are all alike, and unhappy families have their own misfortunes. In Ran's eyes, Black Widow is like a mirror. She is also an orphan. Ran hopes that she will have a good ending, but Brother Russell doesn't seem to have let go of this miserable woman. Water. Give me water. When Ran opened his eyes again, he only felt uncomfortable and his mouth was extremely dry. Hey! At this time, Ran also felt something was wrong, because his voice sounded very immature, as if he had not yet been weaned. Ran moved his limbs, and then a strange feeling came to his heart. Ran opened his eyes and hurriedly looked around slowly. The bed with gorgeous drapery, the large fireplace with exquisite patterns, the beautiful staircase handrails, and the tall and white Roman columns were quite the style of the European court, which made Ran a little afraid. Believe. Ran looked at the two people beside him again, and what caught his eye was a sturdy man and an incomparably elegant lady. The man's eyes were as hot as the blazing sun. Although he was a little sloppy, he looked very mighty. He was dressed in golden light armor and had a long sword hanging from his waist, which was full of majesty. And the lady has small eyes, red circles, and grey eyes. There was the look of an elderly person that had lost its luster and dullness, big, deep, and bright, as if streaks of warm light sometimes shot from within. These eyes gave her an attraction stronger than beauty. Westerners. Seeing the dress of the man and the woman, Ran's heart froze. He turned his eyes and hurriedly looked at the mirror beside him. Ran discovered that the child in the mirror who was being held in the man's arms, turned out to be himself. Ran's eyes darkened, and he immediately shouted. Wow! But as soon as Ran opened his mouth, what he heard was a piercing cry. Pol. Hearing the cry in her arms, the woman angrily said to the man, "It's all your fault, it's you who scared the child." The man looked majestic and dignified, but when he heard the boy's cry and his wife's blame, the man broke his defense instantly, and he was in a hurry. Seeing her husband's overwhelmed look, the woman smiled sweetly, and then quickly took Ran from her husband's arms. The woman happily said to Ran, don't cry, Dad is the most rude." The woman's eyes were particularly bright, it seemed to be the blue of delicate corn flowers, her eyes were soft and warm, and Tauran felt an extremely warm emotion from the woman. It was a warmth he had never experienced before. Tauran stared blankly at the woman, but did not speak for a while. After a while, Tauran smiled happily at the woman, and a bell-like sound spread throughout the bedroom. Hearing Tauran's laughter, the man named Paul from UU reading www.uuganshu.com took a step forward with great joy. Kevlin, the child laughed, did you hear that? My child laughed. The woman rolled her eyes at the man. Paul, keep your voice down. Oh. Paul touched his head, looking very honest. He lowered his voice and said, my youngest son of Baal must be a strong man in the future, and in the future he and his brother Odin will definitely become the biggest one in my unification of the 9 realms. Help! Humph! The woman gave a cold voice, I don't want him to leave me. You took the eldest son Odin, and so many people have died in the royal family recently, just let this little one stay with me. After you leave, Asgard is so boring. Okay. The man was stunned for a moment. Obviously he didn't expect his wife to say such a thing, but thinking of the situation in the 9 realms over the years, the man's eyes suddenly became deep, and after half a minute, he gently spit out a few words, okay, let him stay in Asgard in the future. The woman smiled happily, then lowered her head and kissed the young son in her arms. Tauran never listened to the words of the two. At this moment, Tauran's eyes were so wide that he couldn't believe it. Odin? 9 realms? Is this Asgard? Is this Asgard from the Marvel movies? Iron Man, Asgard in Spider-Man? Wait a moment. Odin is my brother? I'm Odin's younger brother? In the future, Odin, who will unify the 9 worlds and become the Lord of the Gods, is his brother? Is he Thor's uncle? This setting. Tauran likes it. As the ruler of Asgard, in order to celebrate the birth of his youngest son, Baal specially held a grand banquet for this purpose. Even though the 9 realms were in turmoil and the Dark Elves rebelled, the gods in Asgard participated in this grand ceremony without hesitation. Being at the center of the ceremony, Tauran watched the ceremony with great excitement, which was also a feast. Tauran also realized the power of Asgard. In the future, Odin will unify the 9 realms. Of course, Odin's powerful force will be the finale, but it is also inseparable from Asgard's own strength. A stone man with a height of tens of meters. A lizard with big arms, adults call it a giant dragon, but no matter how Tauran looks at it, that big man is a tall and ugly lizard. After the banquet and drinking Odin, the warlock blessed Tauran, and the astrologer divination for Tauran. Although I don't know what those women who seem to be babbling about are doing, but after they finished dancing God, Tauran's mother seemed to be very happy, and she specially rewarded them with some treasures. However, Tauran regretted that he did not see his brother, Odin, who would become the ruler of the 9 realms, at the banquet. Tauran knew that his arrival was a variable. In the original book, Odin was the only descendant of Asgard, but now, because of his arrival, Odin has a brother who is a fellow mother. As an otaku, Tauran naturally has no desire to dominate in this Marvel world where technology and gods and demons coexist, but he doesn't, which doesn't mean Odin doesn't think too much. The common man is innocent, but he is guilty. Odin is a heavenly father-level figure in Marvel. Not only is his own strength unparalleled, but he has unified all the territories of the 9 realms. And after Odin pacified the 9 realms, his own wisdom was also different from ordinary people's sensitivity, and the monarch's skills also reached the level of perfection. During his reign, Asgard has always been the center of the 9 realms, and various ethnic groups are rarely in chaos. All in all, this is not a good brother. In Asgard, Tauran spent a happy childhood, because Asgard is a world of gods and demons, and the people who live here are all gods and ghosts outside. Therefore, when Tauran was 3 years old, he was able to jump around and have fun. This didn't make much waves in Asgard, on the contrary, some maids often boasted of being lively and active. For a mortal, Asgard is the realm of the gods, and the people who live in Asgard are all gods, and the people who live here have a lifespan that far exceeds that of other people. Their average life expectancy is beyond 1,000 years. Therefore, it is very normal for the soldiers here to fight for decades or even hundreds of years. His Royal Highness Wells. His Royal Highness Wells, the Queen is looking for you. 9-year-old Tauran still hasn't changed his lively personality. The Queen of Asgard is often angry because he can't find Tau. Wells, Tauran's father personally named him. Unlike Odin, who means conqueror, Bauer was also heartbroken for this young son. Originally, the king of Asgard also wanted to do it for himself. Very cool name for my youngest son. But Baal couldn't stand the wind from Tauran's mother, so the man who was afraid of his wife gave Tauran a very common name. How common is it? Tauran felt that the name was similar to Go Leftover and Quiwa in the previous world. But Tauran doesn't mind. Although he has never walked out of Asgard, in Asgard, his words are better than anyone else. At this time, Asgard was also a giant level force in the 9 realms. Tauran's older brother, Odin, also made a name for himself outside the 9 realms. Title: Little Highness, the Queen is looking for you. Tauran is floating in a pond, but calling it a pond is somewhat inappropriate, because the pond is 110 kilometers in diameter, and there are even some steel-lined warships stationed on it. Tauran was lying comfortably on the water. To the shouting just now, Tauran just rolled over, and then adopted the policy of ignoring it. Your Highness. Seeing that Tauran was indifferent to his words, the pond was filled with water, and a huge figure jumped out of the water, with row upon row of scales and blazing tail wings. As soon as it appeared, its figure blocked the sun around the pond. Oops! Feeling the coolness in the sky, Tauran rubbed his eyes. Seeing a building several miles away entering his eyes, Tauran pouted and said, "Why are you standing up again?" Tauran's mother doesn't seem to want Tauran to learn magic or martial arts. Therefore, compared with ordinary Asgardians, Tauran is not very different. Therefore, it is impossible for him to be suspended in the pond. The reason why he was able to float on the water just now was because of this giant beast. He had been lying on the head of the giant beast. This giant beast is the mount that Tauran's father captured in Jotunheim. Jotunheim belongs to one of the 9 realms, the capital of giants. In order to capture this king beast, several guards by Bauer died. Individual. A few days ago, when Bauer led his team back to Asgard to rest, Tauran saw this giant beast and played with it for several days. Seeing that his son liked his mount, Bauer put the giant beast beside Tauran. The giant beast moved its head, and a pair of eyes as huge as the sun were rolling around. Your Highness, the Queen is looking for you. Oh well. Tauran couldn't help sighing, put me down. The giant beast grinned, then stretched out its wings, carefully took Tauran off his head, and gently placed it on the green ground. At this moment, the 2 soldiers in armor walked quickly to Tauran's side. Seeing them, Tauran said happily, 2 uncles, is your father back? Seeing the lovely smile on Tauran's face, the 2 soldiers quickly replied, yes, your Highness, the king is back and said he wants to discuss something with you. Tauran nodded knowingly, thinking to himself, no wonder his mother wanted to urge him, it was his father who returned to Asgard. Tauran no longer hesitated, he turned around and shouted at the giant beast, Dragon, I'll go back first, I'll come to play with you another day. The giant beast grinned, and then sank to the bottom of the lake again. Soon, the lake surface regained its calm, and no ripples appeared again. Seeing this, Tauran turned around and walked towards the palace. 10 years of fighting has also made Bauer a little more calm, but when he saw Tauran walk into the palace from the door, the majesty of his body disappeared instantly. He laughed loudly, oh! Wells, my dearest son. Father. Tauran is also very happy. In his last life, he was an orphan. In this life, he can have parents who love him so much. Tao Ran feels that this is God making up for his regrets in his previous life. Ha ha ha. Boer looked at Tao Ran carefully, then stretched out his right hand and patted Tao Ran's head. Good guy, he's already grown so tall. Tao Ran pouted and looked a little unhappy. Father, you messed up my hair. Ha ha. Seeing Tao Ran's pitiful appearance, Bal burst into laughter. You too. At this moment, Tao Ran's mother also came out. Seeing Boer, who was constantly playing with Tao Ran's mother rolled her eyes, like a child. Bal also let go of Tao Ran. He touched his nose and said, "It's rare to be happy." Hearing the queen's words, Bal also stopped playing, but he wrapped Tao Ran with one hand and didn't mean to let go. Looking at Tao Ran, who was about to grow up, Boer put away the smile on his face, and said very seriously, "Wells, you have grown up and are no longer a child, so I plan to make you a good warrior." Tao Ran's mother stared blankly at Bal. After a while, she accepted the news. She looked at Tao Ran, then at Bal, and said, "You didn't promise me." Kevlin. Bal shook his head slightly. Asgard still has many enemies, and we too have an old day. We can't protect Wells for the rest of his life. During the conversation, Bal suddenly paused, as if he felt that speaking like this would make his wife very sad. His tone softened again. Let him learn some self-defense skills, even if he is not as good as Odin, don't let him. He weakened Asgard's reputation. Having said this, Kevlin knew that she could no longer stop her husband. She looked at her little son and sighed lightly. Okay, I agree. Bal did not dare to look his wife in the eyes. He slowly lowered his head, looked at Tao Ran and said, "Wells, do you know? Our family has been the ruler of Asgard since tens of thousands of years ago. Has an unimaginable lifespan, but we are not immortal, so we have to consider some things." Tao Ran nodded, expressing his understanding. In the original comics, the longer the royal family of Asgard lived, the stronger their strength, but this would not be immortal. Besides, how can you live forever in Marvel? Except for those few supreme gods, who would dare to say immortality easily. And many more. How did Asgard come to an end? Ragnarok? Or Thanos snapping his fingers? Thinking of this, Tao Ran's mood suddenly became tense. After 10 years of carefree life here, he suddenly forgot the direction of Marvel's plot. Today's prosperous Asgard will become a ruin one day. The palace collapsed, the corpses of the gods were placed in the river, and even the ominous crow had no place to settle. That was the real end. I understand. Tao Ran nodded heavily. Father, I will definitely protect Asgard. It is good. Seeing Tao Ran's serious appearance, Boer squatted down slowly. He looked directly into Tao Ran's eyes and said, "I'll take you to Valhalla, choose a weapon yourself." Tao Ran stopped talking and nodded his head heavily. Valhalla is a forbidden area in Asgard. Except for the royal family, anyone who dares to step into the Valhalla is a capital offense. Legend has it that the defense force here is even stronger than the palace. In the hearts of the people of Asgard, the Hall of Valor is very special, because not only the former kings of Asgard are buried here, but many heroes who died in battle to protect Asgard are also buried here. Legend has it that if Asgard is destroyed, even if the bodies of these heroes who have died in battle have disappeared, their souls will pick up the weapons of the past, put on the rotten armor, and carry out the final battle for Asgard. War. Therefore, entering the Hall of Valor after death is the biggest dream of many Asgardian warriors. Why did my father ask me to find a weapon here? Tao Ran slowly walked into the Hall of Valor. The four walls of the palace were lined with extremely brightly polished spears, so they were bright and showy. The roof of the palace is paved with golden shields. The seats in the palace are covered with exquisite armor. There is no coffin as imagined by Tao Ran, only a seat carefully crafted by the dwarves. A string of very striking words was written on the wall: all warriors who died in battle must enter this palace as guests. Tauran whispered, "Oh, I remembered that after the most powerful warriors in Asgard died, their weapons would also be buried with them in the Hall of Valor, and there were not only weapons here, but also the ancestors of the royal families of all dynasties. Put some precious treasures in it, father, I want me to be recognized by these heroes." In Asgard, inheritance is a very serious matter. Even if Taurangi is a parent and son of Baal, he still has to abide by this rule. In Tauran's opinion, the Hall of Valor is a strange place. People are dead. How could they fight for Asgard again? But he didn't dare to say anything to Death. Gard really has a way to summon heroic souls. Tauran shouted at the top of his voice, "I'm Bor's youngest son. All ancestors and warriors, are you willing to let your weapons follow me in battle?" A gust of cold wind blew past, and Tauran couldn't help shaking his body. The surroundings were silent, and Tauran touched his nose in embarrassment. He thought that if he shouted casually, the entire Valhalla would be shaken, and then countless weapons were placed in front of him for him to choose, but he was always whimsical. What a gifted ability! Suddenly, Tauran thought of a solution. His face became solemn. Looking at the empty Hall of Valor, Tauran said slowly, "All ancestors, and the warriors who sacrificed their lives for Asgard, you have the heart to have your swords here. Are you going to be silent? Do you have the heart to watch those weapons that were once famous in the Nine Realms become an ornament here?" The sound of a sword being unsheathed fell into Tauran's ears. Tauran shouted in his heart, "There is a play." Tauran secretly concealed his mirth, and he continued to say impassively, "My ancestors, there are some things I dare not tell my father. When I was born, I seemed to see a fragment of time and space in the future. In the future, Asgard will have an enemy. It was a disaster that no words can describe, and later generations will call that disaster Ragnarok. Asgard will also be destroyed because of this, so, ancestors, warriors, do you have the heart to watch Asgard, which was founded by one hand, suffer this disaster? In this solemn place, no one dares to lie. These people are either the ancestors of Tauran or the warriors who shed their last drop of blood for Asgard. Even if Baal is here, he is only a junior." Shoo! After Tauran finished speaking, all kinds of weapons appeared on the seats in the Hall of Valor. The trident of the first king. The second king's shield. The spear of the first warrior of Asgard. There are hundreds of weapons in Tauran's eyes. In Asgard's historical documents, these weapons all have epic legends. They have slaughtered giant dragons or killed the king of the Nine Realms. www.mtlnovel.com. Until now only then did Tauran feel the power of Asgard. If there was no such thing as the blue thread of these people, how could Asgard be called God's domain by the people of the Nine Realms? When you stand in front of these weapons, it is like witnessing the history of Asgard. Proud and confident. Can I take it all with me? Looking at these weapons with golden light effects, Tauran was in a dilemma for a while, because he didn't know which one he should choose. The weapons here are all the top sharp blades in the world, and Tauran doesn't dare to say who is better and who is worse, because that would be a blasphemy to these warriors. Human strength is divided into high and low, but there are no weapons, only those who are defeated by weapons, and there are no weapons for defeat. Boom! Hearing Tauran's voice, those weapons made a roar, as if they were blaming Tauran. "Just kidding, kidding." Seeing this, Tauran said quickly, "Don't take it seriously, I just said it casually." At this moment, Tauran suddenly understood something. The king and the king do not meet each other. These magic soldiers are all king soldiers of various eras. They are all leaders. They all have their own dignity. I want them to serve a master together. It's almost impossible. Maybe Tauran can do it in the future, but the current Tauran is probably not qualified enough. Tauran discovered that in a corner, there was a scorching red light. Although it was a little dark, it was so conspicuous in the group of golden weapons. Tauran seemed to have remembered something, a warm current surged into his heart, and he was extremely excited all over. Reality gem, there is actually a reality gem in the Hall of Valor. Tao ran in his previous life, and Wells today, he thought he could hide his emotions perfectly, but when he saw the reality gem, he realized how naive he was. Reality gem. That's the reality gem, one of the 6 gems of the Marvel Universe. Before the universe came into being, there were 6 singularities, and then the universe exploded and formed. The remains of the 6 singularity systems melted into concentrated hard blocks, and finally formed 6 powerful gems, that is, the Infinity Stones. The 6 gems are the Space Gem, the Mind Gem, the Power Gem, the Time Gem, the Soul Gem, and the Reality Gem in front of Wells. Each of these 6 gems has the power to change the world. In the Marvel Universe, they are well-deserved super artifacts. The tyrant that followed was also because he collected all 6 gems, and finally fulfilled his dream. Half of the population of the entire universe, the number of population and the number of races is an astronomical number. This action of Thanos is simply insane, but it also reflects the power of the Infinity Stones on the side. No matter how powerful a life is, it is just a voice in front of these 6 gems. Wells looked at the crimson light with a shocked expression. Even if he killed him, he would never have imagined that he would see the reality gem in the Hall of Valhalla in Asgard. In the Marvel movie, the reality gem appeared for the first time in Thor 2, and its story background can be turned to the ancient times before the 9 worlds were unified. The Dark Elves were defeated by Odin's ancestors, and the reality gem was defeated by Odin's ancestors. Odin's ancestors ordered a deep burial. Later, the reality gem accidentally entered the body of Thor's ex-girlfriend Jane Foster, and was finally taken away by the leader of the Dark Elves, Malekith. After Thor defeated Malekith, he sent it to the Collector, where it was easily obtained by Thanos. Wells knew that the Dark Elves once possessed the reality gem, but the 6 gems have existed since the beginning of the universe, and the Dark Elves were only one of its masters. If you push it up for hundreds of thousands of years, the number of owners of the reality gem will be too numerous to count. Elves, giants, and humans are all possible. That being said, the royal family of Asgard had also obtained the reality gem, but for some reason, the royal family of Asgard seemed to dislike these 6 gems. They obviously have the attributes of defying the sky, but the royal family of Asgard looks at them like grass, and abandons them like sandals. Could it be? The matter involved the royal family of Asgard and the 6 Infinity Stones, and Wells's mind turned quickly. But just as Wells was staring at the reality gem, the golden light on the hundreds of weapons in the Hall of Valor disappeared, and the crimson-covered reality gem flew towards Wells. At this time, for some unknown reason, the Hall of Valor was a little bit more murderous, and Wells shivered from head to toe. Wells asked with trembling lips, "Are you guys angry?" The reality gem fell into Wells' hands, and at this time, the murderous aura in Valhalla became stronger. These weapons seemed to want Wells to leave Valhalla quickly. There was a hint of impatience in their anger, as if Wells had made a very irrational decision. Go. Wells didn't say anything anymore, turned around and walked out. He chose the last thing he should have chosen. Just as Wells was walking out, a faint voice came from the Hall of Valhalla, and the voice was like the whisper of a ghost. The Ragnarok, an existence that makes me feel throbbing just by its name. Are we really not doing anything anymore? Those who have passed away seem to be discussing something, but Wells knows nothing about it. He just feels that the Hall of Valor seems to be getting colder and colder. If he stays here, he will probably freeze into a popsicle. A dazzling light suddenly erupted on a throne. Asgard is the home of the gods, how could I let it perish? Hearing this voice, the whispers in Valhalla suddenly stopped. The first king of Asgard, the legendary ancient god, was the one who created Asgard. The royal family in the Hall of Valor are only his descendants, and the heroes who died fighting for Asgard are even more so. I grew up listening to his legend. I'm going to. The voice didn't say anything, it flew straight towards Wells, and then quickly flew into Wells' body. What? Wells was shocked, and his little head shook like a rattle at this moment. The people in Valhalla stared blankly at Wells. They didn't seem to expect that the first king would be so decisive. "Okay, as expected of my idol." A domineering voice sounded, and then, another golden light flew towards Wells. Everyone was stunned again, and then said with a relieved smile, "I didn't expect the first warrior to be so reckless." Asgard's first warrior, this is an indelible name in the history of the Nine Realms. Although he did not live very long, his strength is definitely the top 3 in this Hall of Valor. If this Hall of Valor can really revive them, then the first warriors must be the first group of people to turn from death to life, and today, even he gave up the chance of resurrection for Asgard. Then, these people whose chances of resurrection are not very high, how could they choose to survive then? I'm going to. I once fought in the Nine Realms, and even the giant king who was born with divine power had his head cut off by me. Let me do my last bit for Asgard today. More and more voices sounded, and then the rays of light in the Hall of Valor began to shine, and those rays of light rushed towards Wells, lest they be a step behind. What? Many surviving souls sank into Wells' body like bamboo shoots for a moment. Wells trembled and tried to calm down. Although he didn't know what was going on, he didn't feel any hostility in the Hall of Valor. Since it wasn't a house grab, it was probably an opportunity. These lost souls were giving him an unbelievable opportunity. Boy! Wells' eyes darkened, and when he opened his eyes again, he found himself in a strange space, surrounded by incomparably dark, like the eternal edge of the universe. Wells raised his head slightly, and found a white line standing beside him. Do not. Not white light, but a person. This figure is very pale, and between the faint, Wells can distinguish a figure. It is a male. He has golden hair and explosive muscles all over his body. In Wells' eyes, this figure is like the standing Lion King. Although it was a white light, his strength made Wells tremble. He is a strong man in the Hall of Valor. Soon, a piece of news that even he himself could not believe burst out in Wells' mind. The souls left in the world after death are so powerful that Wells can't imagine what this person looked like when he was alive. I'm afraid this is a strong man that even the world mourns for. Good. The white light seemed to have penetrated Wells' mind, and he nodded lightly. I am the soul deposited in the Hall of Valor. My name is too old, I almost can't remember it, but I have heard another title of mine, the First Warrior. Hearing the figure's words, Wells's breath suddenly became rapid. The First Warrior, this man turned out to be the first warrior of Asgard. Asgard was founded for millions of years, during which there were countless kings and warriors, but the first warrior in front of him was definitely one of the best in the history of Asgard. Asgard's sparse territory could be doubled again. The first warrior said lightly, "The moment I entered your body just now, I saw the future in a flash. What you said turned out to be true, and Asgard will really be destroyed one day. I, and the warriors in the Hall of Valor are willing to pass on their power to you, and please stop the arrival of Ragnarok." During the speech, the first warrior knelt down on one leg. This was the highest etiquette in ancient times. It was both a request and an allegiance. Wells quickly helped the first warrior. "No, Senior, my hometown of Asgard, it is my duty to protect it." "Okay, the future is up to you." Hearing Wells' words, the first warrior smiled happily. He didn't get up, but his body became more and more delusional. After a while, his figure disappeared from Wells' eyes. At this moment, Wells opened his eyes again, and the hot light made him seem to have no discomfort. Wells suddenly felt something strange in himself. There was a majestic power in him, surging like a tide. Wells said in a trembling voice, "What kind of power is this?" The Hall of Valor is the habitat of many powerful people in Asgard. Although their residual strength is less than 1/10 of what they were in their lifetimes, when the total amount is added up, this is enough to shock the world. Wells was overwhelmed by this huge happiness. Before he knew it, he found himself outside the Hall of Valor. Hearing the call of his father Bull, Wells came out of the shock. Seeing his son's bewildered look, Ball frowned. "What's wrong with you?" For some reason, Ball found that something was wrong with Wells, who had just walked out of Valhalla, and he couldn't say exactly what was wrong. But seeing that his son was empty-handed, Ball's heart froze for a moment. He forced a smile and said, "Don't your ancestors recognize you? In Asgard, it is a very bad thing to not be recognized and protected by their ancestors. Even if they are the royal family of Asgard, they will fall into the tongues of others." Approval? "The first warriors chose me," Wells murmured in his heart, but he didn't dare to tell what happened in Valhalla. After all, it was too appalling, and Wells couldn't say a reason for Ragnarok. However, Wells knew that Ball was concerned that he did not take out the weapons of his ancestors in the Hall of Valor, which was no small matter. Wells released his palm and put the reality gem in his hand in front of Ball. "I've seen all the weapons of the ancestors, but in the end I thought this gem was pretty, so I brought it out." "You?" Seeing the onyx-like gemstone in his son's hand, Ball narrowed his eyes and looked at Wells carefully, but seeing Wells' tender face, Ball sighed again. "Hey, Waylay, I am afraid that you choose it. Although this gem has some huge power, it is ominous. In ancient times, someone wanted to collect 6 gems and use them to dominate the universe. Forget it, you are too small. If I tell you these things, you won't understand." Wells's face moved slightly. It turned out that someone in ancient times wanted to collect all 6 infinity gems, and Thanos was not the first person who wanted to collect all 6 gems. But compared to those in ancient times, Thanos was only successful. What makes Wells gratified is that Ball seems to know that as long as he can master 6 gems, he can dominate the universe, but he did not do that, and he regarded the Infinity Stones as unknown. With that being said, the royal family of Asgard is much stronger than those with wicked hearts. "Go!" Ball waved his hand and dispersed the guards on the left and right. He squatted down and looked at his son. Ball said solemnly, "Wells, do you know why your mother doesn't want you to learn magic and fighting?" Wells' face also became serious. He nodded to show that he knew. "Mother doesn't want me to compete with my brother for the throne of Asgard." Wells is very clear about his eldest brother who has never met once. He knows that Odin is also avoiding him. Asgard can only have one heir. If Wells is determined to fight for the throne, his flesh and blood will follow. Cannibalism is inevitable. Ball was startled, as if he didn't expect his youngest son to be a sensible person. At this moment, he hesitated, doing this. Do you blame the father and mother? At this moment, Ball no longer has the majesty of a monarch. He is like a father who is worried about his family's property. His 2 sons are full of flesh on the palms and backs of his hands, and he can't give up at all. Do not. Wells shook his head. I'm not suitable to be a king. If I were to ascend the throne, I would definitely be a foolish king. Ha ha ha. Ball couldn't help laughing, and when he heard Wells' words, he seemed relieved. Ball patted Wells on the shoulder. I and your elder brother will protect you. The worry in his heart finally settled down. In Ball's opinion, his eldest son Odin followed him very early. No matter as a prince or a general, Odin was impeccable. He was a very good man. Heirs. And the even more terrifying thing is that Odin's strength is about to catch up with himself. Odin has both the army and strength, and his youngest son is only 10 years old. He will definitely not be the eldest son, Odin. Ding's opponent. Ball was afraid that Wells would miss the throne of Asgard. In that case, the little guy would undoubtedly be courting death. Let's go to dinner, your mother has been waiting for a long time. Ball lifted Wells and put the little guy on his shoulders. After this moment, he had made very detailed plans for his 2 sons. Odin is his heir, the inheritance of royal authority, and Wells is his son. Wells looked at the magnificent Asgard and the classical palace, and was filled with emotion. He suddenly didn't want to stay here. He wanted to go to the 9 realms or the land realm. After eating, Wells walked leisurely to a heavy place in Asgard. If he really left Asgard one day, he would definitely leave from here. A black figure descended in front of Wells, His Royal Highness Heimdall, one of the powerful ancient gods in Asgard, can spy on any corner of the 9 realms anytime, anywhere in the Marvel movies. Bang! Wells was thrown straight out by a figure, and the way he landed was so ugly that the maid next to Wells couldn't bear to watch it any longer. Wells patted the dust on his body, trying to hide his embarrassment, and then said to his opponent, "Heimdall, come again." "Your Highness." Seeing Wells still not giving up, Heimdall's face was a little helpless. He put down the weapon in his hand, and said to Wells dissatisfied, "Your Highness, you have come to me every day for these years, I am not you." "Master, my mission is to protect Asgard." "Ha ha ha." Wells laughed loudly, and then put down the weapon in his hand. Seeing that Wells had stopped fighting, the maid on the side quickly handed over the sweat-wiping silk scarf. Wells took it from the maid with pleasure. Looking at the handsome and dashing Wells, the maid's face turned red and her heart was like a deer. Rambling. Wiping the sweat on his face, Wells handed the silk scarf to the maid again. He also noticed the maid's strangeness, but he didn't say anything. After all, he was handsome, and it wasn't his fault either. Wells looked at Heimdall again. "You have been with me for so many years, how do you feel about my strength over the years?" It has been 10 years since Wells paid attention to the situation of the boundary. For the past 10 years, Wells has come to Heimdall every day to learn martial arts. However, although it was a discussion in name, in fact, Heimdall was always teaching Welsh martial arts. Wells has also grown from a child to a handsome young man, and in terms of his own cultivation, Wells has also changed from a beginner who can't hold his weapons firmly to a samurai who can finally fight Heimdall. Heimdall is not a security guard. The Rainbow Bridge is a weapon for Asgard to fight in the 9 realms. Through it, Asgard can send his army to any corner of the 9 realms at will. This is a very domineering act. Ability, and Heimdall as the guardian of the Rainbow Bridge, if he is not strong, Bol will not put him in such an important position. Heimdall hesitated for a while, but when he saw Wells' eyes full of anticipation, Heimdall's inner softness was also touched by Wells, and he said slowly, "His Royal Highness's strength has surpassed many generals in Asgard." Wells continued to ask, "Compared to my elder brother, Odin?" Heimdall shook his head, "The current strength of the eldest prince may be higher than mine." This sentence, Heimdall said very euphemistically. He did not directly say the difference in strength between the 2 princes, but only said that Odin was stronger than him. "Ha ha ha." Wells burst out laughing. "I didn't expect a man with thick eyebrows and big eyes to say such a thing." Wells is not a fool either. He knows that Heimdall's reason for saying this is actually to take care of himself. After all, Wells is no longer the kid who couldn't even hold a sword. Heimdall didn't speak, just grinned. Through the 10 years of getting along, the relationship between Heimdall and Wells has reached the point of being both a teacher and a friend. Therefore, Heimdall will also tell Wells some secrets from the 9 realms. Heimdall suppressed his voice and said, "Your Highness, your talent is quite good, and you may surpass King Bor in the future." Hearing Heimdall's words, Wells lowered his head, with an expression on his face that was difficult for outsiders to see. "Beyond your own father?" Wells hummed in a voice inaudible to outsiders. At this moment, Heimdall's left eye suddenly jumped, and he quickly turned to look in one direction. Heimdall's expression suddenly changed, and he said in shock, "Svartalfheim, something happened." Svartalfheim, one of the 9 realms, is where the Dark Elves live. What's wrong? Wells knew that Heimdall was an extremely stable person. He had a pair of eyes that could explore the 9 realms. If he had a violent temperament, he was definitely not suitable for this job. At this moment, Heimdall also noticed his gaffe. He took a long breath, and then said to Wells in a deep voice, "Malex attacked King Bor's army in Svartalfheim, and now Asgard's army suffered heavy losses at Svartalfheim. What? Hearing Heimdall's words, Wilston also became nervous. Could it be that you misread it? My father is the king of Asgard, with the strength of dark elves. How dare they attack my father? The relationship between Svartalfheim and Asgard has not been very good from tens of thousands of years ago, but as Asgard has grown in numbers over the years, its strength has become stronger and stronger. No longer an opponent of Asgard. However, those dark elves who pride themselves on being extremely noble are always looking for trouble with Asgard behind their backs. Although the two sides have never had a war, some small frictions have never been broken. And now the leader of the dark elves, Malkis, Wells knows him even more, because he is the big boss of Thor too. Woo! At this moment, a dull drum sounded in Asgard, and then, warriors in various armors quickly gathered in the direction of the Rainbow Bridge. Those despicable dark elves disregarded the treaty and openly attacked the Asgard army. They wanted to start a war. Warriors, the war can no longer be stopped. The voice of Wells' mother suddenly came from the sky. Her emotions were filled with anger, and she was obviously very angry at the undeclared battle of the dark elves. What? The queen's voice, the maid next to Wells, was very panicked. Seeing her like this, Wells waved her and dismissed her. Where's my big brother? Wells and Heimdall were left on the Rainbow Bridge. Wells said the key point: let him lead his troops to reinforce his father. Although Wells is now 20 years old, he has never met his eldest brother, a mother-in-law, but over the years, he can be considered to have learned the power of Odin. I heard that now his father has retreated to two fronts, and the commander of the Asgardian army is Wells' eldest brother, Odin. Odin fought abroad and rarely failed. At a young age, he had the demeanor of a king who did not lose to bore. Heimdall's eyes lit up, and then he quickly looked in one direction, but soon, a look of depression appeared on his face again. Prince Odin is not in Svartalfheim, he is cleaning up those dwarves. Wilston became anxious. Damn, this is a conspiracy. Although Malekith and the Dark Elves under his command are also a big force in the Nine Realms, they are even worse than Asgard, who is in full swing. If Odin and his father join forces, Malekith's Kaith would never dare attack Asgard's forces. Hurry up! Soon, the soldiers in Asgard also gathered at the Rainbow Bridge. One of the generals in armor gave a military salute to Wells, and then came to Heimdall's side, facing the sea. Mdar said, "Open the Rainbow Bridge, my army needs to go to Svartalfheim." "It is good." Heimdall nodded, then quickly drew his weapon. The long sword was inserted into the ground by Heimdall, and then dozens of different rays of light converged into a long corridor that could not be seen at a glance. At this point, a rainbow bridge from Asgard to Svartalfheim is officially formed. Heimdall held the long sword in all his hands, his face was a little pale, and he said to the general, "Please pass quickly." "It is good." The general took a deep look at Heimdall, then walked into the rainbow bridge first, and saw that the leader had already walked over the rainbow bridge, and the soldiers also walked up in a mighty manner. Half an hour had passed by the time Heimdall sent the entire army to the rainbow bridge. After the last person was sent, Heimdall drew his weapon at a thunderous speed, and wiped his forehead. Zihin turned around and said to Wells, "Your Highness, it's not a good job to take care of the rainbow bridge." "Your Highness! Your Highness!" Behind Heimdall, there was still half of a figure, and Heimdall was the only one left in the empty hall. Heimdall felt something in his heart, and quickly looked at Svartalfheim. It was fine, but he was startled. At this moment, Wells has actually appeared on the battlefield of Svartalfheim. "Your Highness!" At this moment, knew Heimdall was really panicking. He knew the Queen's love for this young son. If Wells was hurt, the princess would probably blame him. Besides, Heimdall is, in a sense, Wells' master after these 10 years of company. If Wells really died in Svartalfheim, even if the Queen did not punish him in the end, Heimdall himself will not feel better. Heimdall hurriedly looked at Svartalfheim. He wanted to keep information on Wells at all times. If something went wrong, he would personally go to Svartalfheim to bring back Wells' body after the war. A beam of light fell from the sky, and the soldiers of Asgard were like gods executing judgment, and they wielded their weapons to kill the dark elves. Wells stared blankly at Svartalfheim. The sky here was dark and the air was full of blood, but there were more sand grains visible to the naked eye. Seeing this scene, in Wells' eyes just two words: desolate. Is it really possible to live here? How did the dark elves live here? Just as Wells was looking at Svartalfheim, a dark elf rushed towards Wells. Despicable Asgardians, go to hell. The dark elves wore silver armor and silver masks with only eyes exposed on their faces. The exposed skin was very old and dry. Wells looked at the dark elf coldly, but when the dark elf was less than 1 meter away from his body, Wells stretched out his fist and hit the dark elf's abdomen hard. The dark elf flew out immediately, and after a few seconds, he landed heavily on the ground. This guy was dizzy, confused, and his mind was chaotic. He tried his best to get himself up, but the body seems to keep calling itself. Wells narrowed his eyes slightly, and a wicked smile appeared at the corners of his mouth. He slowly stretched out his hands, raised his head, and the curvature of his mouth continued to expand. Is it only this extent? The dark elf who was punched out by Wells obviously did not expect Wells to be so powerful. He stood up tremblingly. After that punch, his very old face changed even more. It got ugly. The dark elf looked at Wells uneasy, with a rare fear in his eyes. How is it possible? Svartalfheim has now become a mortal enemy with Asgard. The dark elf also saw that Wells was not very old, so he chose to regard him as an opponent, but he never expected that this young man would be a hard bone. He seriously injured himself with just one punch. Wells shrugged, but seeing the dark elf stand up again, Wells' eyes showed a look of approval. Yes, that's right, if you can't even take a punch from me, dark elf, what qualifications do you have to challenge Asgard? Go to hell. At this time, Wells no longer intends to choose to go down with this dark elf. This is not a battle between the two of them, this is a war between two civilizations. The dark elf stood up with difficulty, but when he looked at Wells again, he found that Wells was no longer in front of him. At this time, he became cold all over and shouted, "No! Late!" Wells had appeared behind the dark elf at some point. The silver-colored long sword cut through the dark elf's skin, and a few drops of green blood shot forward. Draw out the sword, retract the sword. Wells' movements were done in one go, as smooth as clouds and water. Wells doesn't seem to be killing people, he seems to be doing a very bland thing. Woohoo! The dark elf clutched his neck in pain, and soon fell to the ground. His whole body twitched for a while, and then he didn't move at all. Wells looked down at the corpse on the ground and said to himself, are these dark elves really Asgard's opponents? The troops that went with Wells were all soldiers stationed in Asgard. Each of them was a veteran who had never died in 100 battles. If the dark elves were of this level, then these self-proclaimed noble elves would only accept others. Slaughter. UU reading www.uuganshu.com. Wells hurriedly looked at his father. He always felt that this dark elf attack was a little weird. The battle between Svartalfheim and Asgard has entered a white-hot stage. With the arrival of Asgard reinforcements from Wells, the dark elves have been gradually surrounded. It looks like it's only a matter of time before Asgard wins this battle. Not long after, Wells saw his father Bal, who was wearing golden armor and holding a long spear, while his opponent was a tall dark elf. Malax. Seeing his father's opponent, Wells whispered. The dark elf who fought against Bor is the king of Svartalfheim, Malax, the big villain in Thor 2. What happened? At this time, Wells also noticed something was wrong. The dark elves were being surrounded and wiped out by Asgard's army, and Malekith, the leader, didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. There is a conspiracy, there is definitely a conspiracy. Although Wells did not understand the art of dividing troops into formations, Malkitha's steadiness shocked Wells. Even if a person with a strong temperament saw that his people were being slaughtered, he would not be able to calm like Malkith. Therefore, Wells thought about it and felt that there must be a conspiracy behind it that he did not know. Go to hell! At this moment, the long spear in Baal's hand rolled around in his hand, and a lightning bolt burst out from the head of the spear. Malkith narrowed his eyes, and the lightning hit him, and immediately, Malkith. There were several streaks of blue smoke coming out of his body. Seeing that Baal was about to attack with a gun again, Malkith's face changed, dang ping bang quickly backwards. Wells took 2 steps forward, but when he was about to start killing, he suddenly felt something was wrong. If he does it himself, then some of his secrets may be exposed, and Wells has not yet been mentally prepared for that. Wells looked at the soldiers who kept retreating, his eyes twinkling. These giants all come from one place, Jotunheim, and only in Jotunheim can so many giants be summoned at one time. The giant family was once a big force in the 9 realms, but with the development of the times, these giants who can only use brute force are gradually abandoned by the times. For thousands of years, Jotunheim has always been the most backward planet in the 9 realms. The giants were not defeated by any force. What defeated them was laziness and lack of progress. Forget it, let's hide your identity. Wells thought for a moment, then snapped his fingers lightly. In an instant, Wells put on a loose black robe. This black robe not only covered Wells' figure, but also covered Wells' face. Outsiders couldn't see anything wrong at all. Hey, at this moment, a giant wielded an axe and swept across the area. Wherever the axe blade passed, blood was flying all over the place, and there was a wailing. Looking for death. Seeing the axe attacking him, Wells snorted lightly, then raised his right hand slightly and grabbed the handle of the axe. The giant's face was covered with dust, and he smelled like he had never taken a bath in his life. When he first came into contact with him, Wells almost fainted. The moment the giant saw Wells holding the handle of his axe, his face suddenly froze, and he roared at Wells, "The people of Jotunheim are born strong men." Wells didn't say a word, he clung to the giant's weapon and let the giant fight, but the axe still didn't advance half a foot. What? What? Seeing that his weapon was motionless in the hands of this little black robe, the giant screamed with anger, and he stretched out another palm to slap Wells on the head. "You're not stupid." Wells smiled slightly, then he let go of the giant's axe handle, tapped lightly with one foot, and his body leaped into the air like a bow and arrow. Boom! Wells slapped the giant recklessly in the air, only to hear a loud explosion in their ears, and the giant's face changed, as if he did not expect Wells' power to be so strong. Go to hell! Wells' body spun in the air, and at the critical moment, Wells flexibly avoided another giant's fist. After a breath, he came to the air. Wells loosened his fingers, then clenched them tightly, hitting the 2 giants in front of him with his fists. Bang bang! Wells' fist actually produced a harsh sonic boom in the air. The giant had never seen such a scene before. The 2 quickly retreated, but the 2 rushing fists arrived in an instant. Boom! The faces of the 2 giants turned black, and then they fell to the ground. Seeing these 2 giants fall, Wells didn't care whether they were dead or not. He jumped into the air and looked at the Asgardian army on the ground that was trying to resist the attack of the dark elves and giants. He shouted with all his strength. With a cry, "Stop all of them!" Wells' voice formed a wave visible to the naked eye in the air. Wherever the sound wave passed, the 3 armies only felt dizzy, and they quickly covered their ears. The originally noisy battlefield suddenly became quiet because of Wells' roar. Everyone forgot about the fight for a while, and they raised their heads to look at the sky at the same time. It was the first time that Wells was watched by so many people, and he felt a little strange in his heart, but when he thought of the situation in Asgard, he had to suppress the discomfort in his heart again. "You." Wells spit out 2 words softly, and stopped in an instant. His voice is too tender. These people on Earth have lived for thousands of years, even tens of thousands of years, and even their eyelashes are empty. It is really not easy to deceive them. Wells lowered his voice and said slowly, "You guys are so annoying, my old man finally got some sleep here, you." But before Wells finished speaking, a man walked out of the giant's army. He yelled at Wells in the air, "Old man, who are you?" Wells deliberately made his voice vicissitudes, like an old monster that has lived for tens of thousands of years. Wells stopped talking. He looked down at the man who just walked out of the giant camp. This man is dressed in armor and is more decently dressed than any giant in the field, but his height is only half that of a normal giant. In the giant army, this person looks like a dwarf. But when this man came out, all the giants fell silent, and they looked at the man in front of them with awe. The royal family of Jotunheim? Seeing the man in front of the giant camp, Wells seemed to understand something. In ancient times, giants were also a big force, and they once had a very splendid civilization. Although the giant family has lost its former glory, the lineage of the leaders who once created the giant civilization has been successfully passed down and has become the royal family of Jotunheim. In Jotunheim, the royal family is also known as the Golden Bloodline. They are only half the height of normal giants, but their wisdom and strength are far beyond other giants. Just like the giant in Wells' eyes at this time. Wells lowered his head and said lightly, "Young people, you must know how to respect the old and love the young." Ha ha ha. Hearing Wells' words, the giant from the royal family of Jotunheim burst out laughing. "Old man, have you lost your mind? You tell me to respect the old and love the young. My God, it turns out that someone tell me to respect the old and love the young again. He he he." The giants also laughed, and the laughter was quite disdainful. Hey! After Wells sighed, he stretched out his right hand and aimed at the giant with the blood of the royal family of Jotunheim. Shoo! Immediately, the royal family from Jotunheim flew into the air. Wells stared at him blankly. "You!" Seeing that he actually flew into the air, the giant panicked. He yelled at Wells, "Old man, let me down, let me down." Hearing the wailing in the air, Wells was unmoved, and then continued, "It seems that you still don't know how to respect the old and care for the young." Hey! Everyone saw a black shadow flashing for a while. When they opened their eyes again, they found that Wells had appeared beside the giant in the sky. Looking at the giant struggling in the air, Wells said softly, "If you don't know how to respect the old and love the young again, I will definitely spank you heavily." Clap clap. While speaking, Wells stretched out his right hand and gently patted the giant's face. Seeing this scene, the expressions of everyone on the ground changed. Feeling a tinge of coolness on his face, the giant with the royal blood of Jotunheim suddenly became quiet. A few beads of sweat appeared on his handsome face, and he looked at the black-cropped man in front of him. The giant trembled and said, "Old man, this must be a misunderstanding. We giants know how to respect the old and love the young best." Being humiliated in front of so many people, the prince from Jotunheim was not at all angry, because he didn't dare to be angry. He didn't know if the man in black robe in front of him would spank him, but he knew at this moment even if the man in black robe killed him, he couldn't resist. Even the giant army on the ground can't save him. The strength of this man in black robe is absolutely superior to him. Very good. Hearing the giant's words, Wells nodded in relief. "I like obedient children the most." Ha, he he. The man with the blood of the giant royal family didn't know what to say, he could only laugh dryly. "All right." Wells waved his hand, and the giant floating in the air immediately fell to the ground, and then Wells said to the three-way army on the ground, "Go, go, go back to wherever there is, don't interfere with my old man's sleep." Hearing Wells' words, the dark elf leader Malkith's face sank. He raised his head and shouted to Wells, "Old man, in order to ambush Asgard's army, Malkith started planning a long time ago. If he missed today, Malkith felt that he might be trampled by Asgard in his entire life. If that's the case, it's even harder than killing Malkith." Humph! Wells snorted coldly, with a thick nasal tone. In an instant, the space seemed to vibrate for a moment. Malekith only felt that his breathing was uncomfortable. After this moment, his body felt a little out of breath. Malekith looked up at Wells with a rather unsightly expression on his face. This black-cropped man is so powerful. Malekith was terrified in his heart. He is also the king of dark elves, and his own strength is also unparalleled, but at this moment in front of this black-cropped man, he has no ability to resist. Wells said to Malekith, "Retreat or die. I can't kill all the dark elves, but I can kill you. You." Malekith's anger surged into his heart instantly. He didn't expect this black-cropped man to be so despicable. "Go back." Wells' voice had no emotion at all. It's useless to talk too much. At this moment, Malekith could see that this man in black robe came out to make trouble. It wasn't them who disturbed this man's sleep. www.mentalnovel.com. It was this man who wanted to protect Asgard. "Army. We withdraw." Malekith looked at the sky angrily. "Let's get out of here." Just as Malax and the giants were about to leave the battlefield, a huge void appeared in the sky, followed by a golden light falling from the sky. "Go to hell!" An angry voice sounded in the ears of everyone, and then several sword lights with killing intent shot at the camp of giants and dark elves. The killing intent on those sword lights is extremely pure. It seems that it was born to kill. As far as the sword light came, the giants and the dark elves fell to the ground like straw. In just a few breaths, hundreds of dark elves fell to the ground, and the burly giants also died, more than 20. Bold. Who, seeing his subordinates fall in front of him, Malax and the giant with the bloodline of the king of Jotunheim, were shocked and angry, and they looked forward with extreme anger. "Your Highness!" The golden light disappeared, and a valiant man appeared in front of everyone. Seeing that handsome man, Asgard's army immediately exploded. Hearing the exclamations of the army, Wells in the sky trembled slightly. He opened his eyes wide and looked at the young man on the ground. It was an extremely handsome man. He had short hair, wheat-colored skin, and deep eyes. In Wells' eyes, this man was like the most ingenious work of the Creator. Odin. The future Lord of the Nine Realms, a man called the King of the Gods. Also, this is his own brother. In the beam of light, more and more warriors came down from the Rainbow Bridge. They gathered with the soldiers of Asgard and prepared for battle at the same time. Odin was surrounded by many soldiers in Asgard. They looked like a fanatical religious believer at the moment, and the soldiers pulled out their hands to hug him. Odin waved at the soldier, and then came to Bal. "Father." Odin knelt down on one knee in front of Bal. "I'm late." Bal quickly helped Odin up. Although he knew that this was his son, Odin was also the future king of Asgard. The king never had to kneel to anyone. "Father." After Odin got up, his face slowly turned cold. He looked at the giants and dark elves in front of him, and said, "This time we can exterminate them in one fell swoop, kill them, at least Jotunheim and Svartalfheim for 1,000 years. There will be no more wars." This. Hearing Odin's words, Bal's face was hesitant, and he looked at the sky hesitantly. Since the appearance of this black-cropped man, the battlefield has not been decided by the three of them, but by this strange and unpredictable black-cropped man. Just now, it was precisely because of this black-cropped man that the Dark Elves and the Giants had the intention to retreat, and the army of himself and Asgard avoided the danger of being annihilated. At this time, although Bauer was also very moved by his eldest son's proposal, he was also afraid of angering this unidentified black-cropped man. Seeing his father Bauer also looking at him, Wells was silent for a while, and finally said in a cold voice, "Go back." The arrival of Odin broke Wells' plan. He originally wanted Malekith and the giants to retreat. But because of Odin's arrival, the balance of war has completely tipped towards Asgard. If they take off their black robes at this time, the three of them can indeed completely defeat the alliance of Dark Elves and Giants. But to Wells, the Dark Elves and Giants are nothing. The real crisis is the crisis of the whole universe. Therefore, Wells did not want to let his father and brother kill Malekith and the giants in one fell swoop. Kill them, there will be variables in the future. Malekith will eventually die, but it shouldn't be today. Seeing that the two Asgardian armies had joined forces, Malekith's face was a little gloomy. Paul, I have already promised to withdraw, so why don't you plan to kill them all? Just now Malax was still blaming the black-cropped man for messing up his plan, but now that Odin came, he realized that the black-cropped man had saved him, and now he is facing all Asgard. The army, even the dark elves and giants, would not be a match for Asgard. Because, Asgard's army is recognized as the master of 100 battles in the 9 realms. For nearly 1,000 years, they have rarely lost in the 9 realms. Okay. Hearing the words of the black-cropped man and Malak's questioning, Baal raised his brows and struggled in his heart for a long time. It was not until half a minute later that he said in a deep voice, Odin, let them retreat. Odin said anxiously, Father. As long as his father gave an order, he and his soldiers would rush towards the army of Jotunheim and Svartalfheim. Odin believes that it will not be long before those weak dark elves and some immobile giants will collapse, and Svartalfheim and Jotunheim will officially become Asgard's dependencies. With the protection of God's domain, the elves and giants will live better. This is a completely beneficial and harmless thing. Odin didn't understand why his father would disagree. All right. Bor's whole body suddenly let go of the momentum, the whole person was like an emperor. He slowly glanced at Odin, his eyes with a touch of majesty and unquestionable, Odin, I have made up my mind on this matter, don't mention it again. Odin bit his head and nodded, okay. During the speech, Odin's eyebrows and eyes showed a layer of sadness. This kind of gotcha of an opportunity would never have happened before, nor will it appear again in the future. If you want to conquer Jotunheim and Svartalfheim, you have to rely on force in the end. At that time, you don't know how many soldiers of the god's domain will die. Go back. A layer of pain crept into Baal's eyes. He ordered to his soldiers, Soldiers, let's go home. Baal also understands Odin's mood at the moment, because he also knows what a golden opportunity this is, but he is more afraid of the man in black robes for his son's anger. There is no need to anger this black-cropped man. This was the only thought in Baal's mind. Hearing Bor's words, Malax's expression softened slightly, he winked at the leader of the king bloodline of the giant family, and then the two of them retreated to the depths of Svartalfheim at the same time with the army. Seeing the dark elves and the giants retreat at the same time, Wells breathed a sigh of relief. He was afraid that his eldest brother would do something unexpected, but it seemed that he was still thinking too much. His own father, in Odin's heart, still has a very high status. After the enemy retreated, Bor said loudly to Wells in the sky, this time, thank you for your relief, we Asgard are very grateful. No matter what, Baal was very grateful to the man in black in the sky. Giving charcoal in the fire is always better than icing on the cake. When Asgard was at its most perilous time, the man in black robe stopped the atrocities of the dark elves, which was a great favor. Wells responded in a deep voice, go back. It is good. Baal seemed to hear that the man in black robe was displeased, he nodded and said nothing more. Bor looked at the sky and said in a loud voice, Heimdall, open the rainbow bridge, we're going back. Heimdall? How could I forget this person? Wells muttered a word, and then his face became a little unnatural. Boom! Several dazzling beams of light in the sky slammed into the ground, and for a while, it seemed that the entire Svartalfheim was brightened, and many creatures living in Svartalfheim looked at the beams in awe. Rainbow Bridge. No one in the 9 realms knows about it, a war machine that no one knows about, and Asgard's sharp blade for conquering the world. Go! Baal gave Wells a noble salute, and then quickly walked towards the Rainbow Bridge with the army. Soon, thousands of Asgardian troops entered the Rainbow Bridge mightily, but there was still one person standing there, looking at Wells with a gloomy expression. Seeing the handsome young man on the ground, Wells raised his brows, young man, I feel hostility in you. The emperor-like young man on the ground was Wels' eldest brother, Odin. Wels did not dare to be careless about this future ruler of the 9 realms. He was tense all over, for fear of his eldest brother. Notice any difference? Shoo shoo! Odin suddenly let go of his aura, and he slashed twice at the sky. In an instant, 2 bright lights that were more dazzling than the rainbow bridge flew towards Wels. Wherever the blade passed, the space trembled, almost cracking. Fuck! Seeing this, Wels screamed wildly in his heart. It was too late, but it was so fast. Wels raised his palm like thunder, and an invisible wall of air was built in front of Wels. Bang! 2 powerful auras gathered together in the air. Impressively, Wels suppressed the strangeness in his heart and calmly put away his palm. Do you want to challenge this old man with me? Seeing Wels' calm appearance, Odin's eyes showed a trace of fear. Excuse me. After finishing speaking, Odin also walked towards the rainbow bridge, and his voice also entered Wels' ears. This action has nothing to do with Asgard. If you want revenge, find me. Well, my name is Odin. Odin's voice is very domineering, but he is also very proud. So strong. After Odin left, Wels looked down at his palm, and until this moment, the trembling above his palm hadn't stopped. Outsiders say that Odin already has the courage not to lose to Baal, but now, Wels thinks that even his father may not be the opponent of his elder brother. He already had this kind of strength at a young age, and he deserves to be the future lord of the 9 realms. Wels slowly landed on the ground, and at the moment when he landed, the black robe on his body disappeared. After putting the reality gem in his hand in his pocket, Wels quickly walked out to the rainbow bridge. After a while, Wels appeared in Asgard's territory. Second Highness, you were really amazing just now. Before Wels could stabilize his body, a joking sound came from his ear. Wels stumbled and almost fell, but at this moment, a dark shadow immediately supported him. Second Highness Heimdall had a half-smiling smile on his face. You can't make a mistake. Seeing the smile on Heimdall's face, Wels knew that this guy knew his secret. Wels took care of his clothes www.mdlnovel.com and said very seriously, Heimdall, this matter should not be publicized, you and I should know about it. In fact, when he heard his father call Heimdall, Wels vaguely felt that he might be exposed. After all, Heimdall has a pair of eyes that can see through the illusion. Of course, it would be fine if Heimdall hadn't paid attention to him, but Wels was afraid that Heimdall had been staring at him, and Jotunheim would have seen his actions in Svartalfheim clearly. Now it seems that things are still going in the worst direction. Why? Heimdall's face was a little puzzled. If King Boer knew that it was your ability, you would definitely be entrusted with important tasks. Wels shook his head, then took out the red gem from his pocket. I don't have that much ability, it's all about it. Heimdall's pupil shrank. Magic stone, Your Highness, how could you have it? That's a long story. Wels shook his head. Heimdall, let me tell you another day, I'm too tired today. Heimdall nodded regretfully. Okay. Wels yawned, then patted Heimdall on the shoulder, and then walked towards Asgard's palace. Just a few days after Wels returned to Asgard, an incredible piece of news spread quickly in Asgard. Faced with the turbulent situation in the 9 realms, Baal. The king felt old and knew that he could no longer control Asgard. In order to fulfill his ancestors' ideal of unifying the 9 realms, King Bo voluntarily passed on the throne of Asgard to his eldest son, Odin. Your Highness, wake up, wake up. In Asgard's palace, while Wels was still in a drowsy sleep, an anxious shout suddenly sounded beside him. All right. Wels opened his eyes exhausted, but when he saw the maid next to him, he immediately turned over and fell asleep again. His Royal Highness Wels. Seeing that Her Highness ignored her, the maid who was famous for her beauty finally became angry. She pulled Ravels hard, trying to pull him up from the bed. His Royal Highness, King Bor said, pass the throne to His Royal Highness Odin, and tell the Queen quickly. The maid who served Wells was also a person by the queen's side, but as Wells got older, Wells' mother knew that Wells had also reached the age of falling in love, so she put this name with her. Wells' maid was sent to Wells's side. Therefore, in the eyes of outsiders, this maid is Wells's pillow. Pass. Wells opened his eyes, then sat up abruptly. My father is in his prime. How could he have such thoughts? The residents of Asgard have a long lifespan. It is not a problem for ordinary people to live for 100 years, or even 1,000 years. As the king of Asgard, Bauer is extremely powerful, and it is not a big deal to live for tens of thousands of years. At this time, why did he want to abdicate? Besides, Asgard has been established for so long, and so far there has not been a king who has abdicated alive. What is the reason for Ball to have such an idea? A refreshing aroma overflowed into Wells' nose. At this time, the maid was already sitting on the head of Wells' bed. Your Highness, your relationship with the Queen is so good, you should tell the Queen that she should not pass the throne to His Highness Odin. Confused. Hearing the maid's words, Wells turned his head and scolded her. How can my mother intervene in this kind of thing? This is a big taboo. Wells knew exactly what the maid meant. She just wanted her father to pass the throne to her. However, when Wells was young, he had a conversation with his father, and he didn't want to sit in that position at all. However, these things are not enough for outsiders. Oh! The maid looked at Wells full of grievances. Your Highness, if Prince Odin ascends the throne, will he attack you? Are you worrying too much? Hearing the little maid's words, Wells smiled and shook his head, then stood up from the bed. No, seeing Wells' thick arms and Kong Wu's chest, the little maid lowered her head, and the red clouds flew, not daring to look directly at Wells. Your Highness is so handsome, the little maid said in surprise in her heart. At the beginning, she came to take care of the second Highness under the order of the Queen. At that time, she had already become the woman of the second Highness, but for some reason, the second Highness never touched her. Except for some verbal molesting, the second Highness even she never touched her hand. This can't help but make the little maid feel frustrated. All right. Wells said calmly, change my clothes, I'm going to see my mother. By the way, my cheap big brother. Half an hour later, Wells came to the Asgard Council Chamber, but the bustling council chamber in the past turned out to be deserted today, and there were only a few people in the hall. Mother. Wells bowed to his mother and father. Father. Seeing a man with extraordinary bearing standing next to his father Ball, Wells bowed and said, Big brother. The young man beside Bauer is Odin, who has a relationship with Wells, but at this time he no longer has the domineering in Svartalfheim. In front of his father and mother, he is more like he is the eldest son of a mature and stable family. Odin didn't speak either, just smiled. Wells. Bowl's eyes lit up with Wells' arrival. He took Wells' hand and said happily, your brother followed him to fight in the Nine Realms since he was a child. As a result, your brothers rarely have the chance to meet each other. It's all my fault. But... Bauer's conversation changed, and then he said with a breathless voice, after today, this kind of thing will not happen, I will pass the throne of Asgard to my brother, from now on, your brother will be in charge. Asgard, you brothers will never part again. After Bauer finished speaking, he looked at Wells expectantly. Not only Ball, but also Wells' mother looked at her young son in a complicated way. Seeing the expressions on his parents' faces, Wells sighed in his heart. Although they are the royal family of Asgard and the most powerful family in the Nine Realms, at this moment, they have nothing to share with the big mortal families. Essential difference. It is good. Wells readily accepted, I support my father's choice. In fact, Wells really didn't have too many thoughts about the throne. Wells was free and easy by nature, and his character was not suitable for being a king at all. On the contrary, Odin was the best candidate for a king. Hearing Wells' words, Odin, who was standing by the side, had a slight surprise. He looked at his brother with a little surprise, but he didn't know how to speak for a while. Odin never regarded his younger brother as an opponent, but Wel's humility surprised him. After all, what they were fighting for was not a few acres of fertile land in the mortal world, but the control of Asgard. As long as you become the king of Asgard, you can gain the allegiance of all Asgard warriors, and in the future, you may even become the supreme king of the 9 realms, a veritable king of the gods. Wel's mother took Wells into her arms, and she suppressed her sadness and said, "We can't give you anything. We are not qualified parents. Everything about the king and queen came from Asgard, and now they are about to abdicate. Except for their honor, they found that they couldn't give their young son something substantial, which made Bal and Kevlin very uncomfortable. People of Asgard." At this time, Bal came to the window of the council hall and saw the Asgard subjects who had been waiting on the ground for a long time. Bal said slowly, 2 days ago, I made a very wrong decision. There was the chance to destroy the dark elves and giants. I didn't order it, and after returning to Asgard, I thought about it and thought that I was not worthy of being the king of Asgard. Bolton paused. My son Odin, he has more strength than me. I believe that under his leadership, Asgard will definitely become the center of the 9 realms. It turned out to be because of me. Hearing his father's words, Wells muttered in his heart. Before, Wells was still wondering why his father had the idea of abdicating. It turned out that all this was because of the dark elves and giants a few days ago. Letting go of his enemies, Bauer thought that this would humiliate the image of the king. In the long run, he was afraid that he would not be able to convince the public, so he passed the position of the kingdom to his son. Perhaps, Bauer also has an idea for a peaceful transition of the regime. Taking advantage of this dark elf's calamity, let the king's position be passed on to his eldest son, in order to avoid sibling rivalry in the future. Wells gave his father Bal a thumbs up in his heart. Bal may be indecisive, but for his 2 sons, his approach is impeccable. It's hard for anyone to fault him at this point. Odin! Odin! The people on the ground cheered and shouted Odin's name loudly. Odin adjusted his clothes, then walked towards Bal with his head held high. Just as Odin stepped forward, his body also changed, golden light covered his whole body, and the scepter and crown symbolizing the identity of the Asgard kingdom also appeared on his body. At this moment, Odin is majestic, solemn, and domineering. Wells whispered to himself, the 9 realms have entered another era from now on. Odin, this is a character that cannot be ignored in the Marvel world. There is a saying that goes, Odin doesn't die, Thanos can't. Although this sentence is somewhat exaggerated, Odin's power is beyond doubt. Today, Odin is crowned king, so the days before the reunification of the 9 realms are numbered. Odin's coronation ceremony also became a prosperous world in the 9 realms for a while. It lasted for 7 days. After that, Odin became the king of Asgard justifiably. And former Queensflynn also bid farewell to Asgard politics and retired ahead of schedule. As Odin's younger brother, Wells was also named the First Order Prince of Asgard by Odin. He can live in Asgard's palace permanently, and his status in Asgard is also very high. But he has no power in his hands. For this reason, Wells didn't say anything. Anyway, for him, these things don't care. However, just a few months after Odin ascended the throne, Odin also entrusted Wells with a very important task. At the time when Asgard's regime is changing, in order to stabilize Asgard's allies beautiful and moving elves, Odin's younger brother Wales will replace King Odin as an ambassador to Alfheim. When he received this order, at first, Wells was a little repulsive. What a envoy, obviously someone wanted him to leave Asgard. However, when he thought that in Asgard, he was just an idler eating the king's meal, Wells readily accepted this order. The current Asgard is no longer the original Asgard. Even the heir seems to have strange emotions. Wells dislikes it more and more. If not for his father and mother still here, Wells 80% has left Asgard. Now, Odin's order is just enough to let him leave Asgard and go outside to avoid the limelight, just relax. In short, it's better not to wait for Asgard. Perhaps, after a few more days, when Odin's throne is firmly seated, he will come back. Alfheim, the realm of the elves. These elves are not the dark elves of Svartalfheim. The dark elves are just a branch of the elves. Compared with the real elves, they are just old relatives from poor mountains and bad waters. The real elves have always looked down on the dark elves headed by Malkis, believing that they tainted the noble blood of the elves. The enmity between the two veins has been going on for thousands of years, and until now, they still see each other wrongly. And the reason why the elves are friendly with Asgard is also because of this. The news that Odin's younger brother is coming to Alfheim has already set off a frenzy in Alfheim. The elves are all eagerly waiting for Wels, and some beautiful female elves are even more early. Dress yourself up. The elves have been friends with Asgard for generations, and the nobles of Asgard also like to marry elves women. Elf women are known in the 9 realms for their delicate body, soft body, and beauty. In addition, the aging of elves is far lower than that of ordinary people. Therefore, many elves women are very popular in the 9 realms. And Wels, as Odin's younger brother, has an extraordinary position in Asgard, so as soon as the news of his mission to Alfheim came, many elf women were already moved. Boom! A dazzling beam of light shot straight from the sky to the opposite side. After a while, several soldiers in heavy armor came out of the beam of light. Is this Alfheim? Those brave soldiers were divided into left and right teams, and then, a handsome young man walked out from the rainbow bridge. Cough cough. Wels' stomach turned upside down, he coughed heavily, and then scolded the sky in a low voice, Heimdall, you idiot, can't you slow down? The many elves looked at each other in dismay, as if they did not expect such a situation. One of the elves at the head shouted to Wels, is it His Highness Wels? Although Wels is no longer the little prince of Asgard, he is still the first order prince of Asgard. In the eyes of the elves, he is still an important figure in Asgard. Wels quickly withdrew his gaze. He looked for the reputation and found that there were already people standing in front of him. In Alfheim's prophecy, the elves are the saints of heaven and earth, and they are favored by the goddess of nature. Therefore, everyone in the elves is handsome, and there are almost no ugly creatures. Just as Wels glanced at the appearance of the elves, the elf man who had just opened his mouth had walked over to Wels. Looking at the dignified Wels, the man said with a smile, His Royal Highness, I didn't expect you have grown up, and I attended your birthday banquet back then. Hearing the man's words, Wels retracted his gaze, are you the chief elder of the elves? At the beginning, when Wels was born, King Bor deliberately held a grand banquet in Asgard. Some of the 9 world dignitaries who were friends with Asgard were invited, among them the elves. Great Elder. In Wels' cognition, the elf family is also a wonderful flower in the 9 realms. It has existed for a long time, and its history can even be traced back hundreds of thousands of years ago, but it is surprising that it has not yet had any centralized power. Civilization. The power in the elves is jointly controlled by 10 elders, and the person in front of Wels is the elder of the elves' brothers. Wels originally thought that the elder of the elves would be a strong and mature middle-aged man, but he never imagined that this person who looked only a few years older than himself would be the elder of the elves, an old monster that has lived for thousands of years. The fair skin set off the pale pink lips, the handsome and prominent facial features, the perfect face shape, especially the dazzling diamond earrings in the left ear, added a hint of unruly to his sunny handsomeness. Could it be that the elves rely on their looks to compete for rights in the clan? At this moment, a different emotion rose in Wels' heart. Your Highness, the first elder kindly took Wels' hand. Asgard finally sent someone over, I feel that this matter must be yours. Well. Wels was a little confused by the elders of the elves. He nodded again and again, but when the elders finished speaking, Wels also felt something was wrong, and he said carefully, I'm not just here. Would you like to visit Alfheim? At this time, Wells had scolded the think tanks under his elder brother countless times. He thought that this trip to Alfheim was just an ordinary diplomatic trip about the replacement of the new kings of Asgard. But I didn't expect that there was still a task behind it. Mother Wells scolded angrily in his heart. Although he has extraordinary strength, when it comes to conspiracy and tricks, he still can't play the politicians under his eldest brother. Okay. The first elder looked at Wells strangely. Your Highness, don't you know? There is something wrong with our tree of life. A long time ago, we sent a request to Asgard for help, when the king of Bor was on the throne. At that time, he personally promised me that he would solve this matter for me, Your Highness. Aren't you here for this matter? The first elder looked at Wells suspiciously, and there was some doubt in his eyes. Ha ha ha. Wells laughed dryly, and then said loudly, of course, I'm here for this matter, but Brother Wang personally told this matter for me. Wells touched his nose in embarrassment, but in his heart he scolded the think tank under Odin countless times. Hearing Wells' words, the great elder nodded in relief. Okay, let's go to the Tree of Life. Wells wanted to refuse, but seeing the excited look on the elder's face, Wells was also a little embarrassed to speak. He had to let the elder hold his hand, and the group began to go deep into Alfheim. Go! Everyone stopped in front of the entrance of a forest and saw a green forest ahead. The elves seemed to have seen a devil, and they looked at the entrance of the forest with incomparable fear. Your Highness, the first elder let go of the hand that was holding Wells. He motioned Wells to move forward, while he quickly stepped back. His Royal Highness, the specific question, when I was on the road, I've already told you, the rest is up to you. After finishing speaking, the great elder left the place in a hurry with the elven people. Your Highness! Many of the soldiers who followed Wells to Alfheim also looked at Wells in confusion. Until now, they still didn't understand what was going on. Wells tidied up his clothes, and then he ordered the soldiers, you stay here, don't let anyone in, go in and see. On the way here just now, the elder has already told Wells about the situation. This matter is very strange, and he doesn't want these Asgard soldiers to lose their lives in vain. The cavalry said anxiously, Your Highness. Wells waved his hand and stopped these soldiers from speaking. Needless to say, just stay here. After he finished speaking, Wells didn't say any more. He turned and walked into the forest. The Tree of Life is the foundation for the survival of the elves. When every elves are born, their parents will pray under the Tree of Life. And the elves who are blessed by the Tree of Life and people will be specially taken care of by the elders of the elves, and they will flourish in the future, becoming the high-level people of the elves, and even the elders. The time seems to be different from the outside. The moment Wells walked into the forest, he noticed the changes around him. The time here seemed to be different from outside. Wells just took 2 steps, but it seemed like a long time had passed. 1:100, or 1:000. When he arrived just now, the elder of the elves told Wells about this, and some elves living in the forest actually showed signs of aging. For the elves, aging is a nightmare that is even more terrifying than death. And this phenomenon started decades ago. At first, the elves didn't take it to heart. Because in their hearts, the Tree of Life is omnipotent, it has the ability to self-regulate, and it does not have enough difficulties that it cannot eliminate. However, things did not seem to develop according to the elves' expectations. When the first clan began to die, the elders of the elves also realized the seriousness of the matter, and death actually appeared under the Tree of Life. Then, can the Tree of Life continue to protect the elves? Asgard has always been on good terms with Alfheim. In the hearts of many elves, Asgard is like a big brother. So, the first elder told Ball about this matter, hoping that Asgard could pull his little brother. Unfortunately, this matter finally fell into Wells' hands. Hey, if it was someone else, it might not be possible, but this doesn't include me. While speaking, he held the reality gem in his hand again. Boom! The surroundings seemed to be silent, and there seemed to be no change at all, but in the dark, the air seemed to have stopped, extremely light. Ah! Wells chuckled lightly, then strolled forward. After a while, Wells walked to the center of the forest. It was a very majestic giant tree. Its body was hundreds of feet wide, and its torso was inserted into the sky, and it was impossible to see the edge. Wells stared at the scene in front of him dumbfounded. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something. The tree of life? Is this the tree of the world? I didn't expect that in the 9 realms, there are still people who know the existence of the world tree. At this time, vicissitudes of life sounded beside Wells. It was like it came from ancient times. On this sound, Wells felt a very ancient aura. The voice went on to say, "I'm really surprised. I didn't expect that you still have the aura of an old friend." Wells held the reality gem tightly in his hand, and he looked around calmly, secretly preparing for battle. No, the man's mood fluctuated again. "I didn't expect that you still have one of the 6 magic stones in your hand, which really surprised my old man." Hearing this voice, Wells trembled all over. At this moment, he seemed to be stripped naked, with no privacy at all. The inheritance of Valhalla and the Infinity Stones, these are the secrets that Wells hid in his heart, but today these secrets are being seen through and through again and again, which makes Wells extremely uncomfortable. "Young man, don't get too excited, I'm not hostile." Soon, a kind face appeared on the trunk of the giant tree, and he looked at Wells with a smile. "You have the aura of Asgard, you must be from Asgard." Var. Seeing the serene face on the giant tree, Wells was startled, but when he thought of the identity of the giant tree, he felt a little less anxious. Wells bowed to the giant tree. You are the tree of life." Wells is not surprised that the tree of life can give birth to spiritual consciousness. After all, this is a creature as old as Alfheim. If it is just a giant tree without any consciousness, then it is truly wonderful. Right. The face on the giant tree smiled even more. "A very smart young man, unlike those elves, who haven't noticed anything strange for tens of thousands of years." Ha ha ha. Wells didn't know what to say at this time, he could only laugh dryly. "If it wasn't for you, the old man, who took the initiative to speak, I wouldn't know that consciousness was born." Wells murmured in his heart. After a while, Wells said the question in his heart, "Old man, let me ask, is there something wrong with you?" At this moment, the smile on the tree of life stopped abruptly. The old man said in a deep voice, "Young man, can I ask you a question?" "Please speak." Wells nodded, but in his heart he had already guessed the question the tree of life was going to ask. The tree of life looked at Wells with a serious face. "How did you know about the world tree?" Sure enough, Wells knew that the tree of life was going to ask this question. After all, the world tree is not something that ordinary people can know. Even in the 9 realms, knowing the existence of the world tree, Wells speculated that it would not exceed 1 finger. And the reason why Wells knew it was because he was a transmigrator. Wells replied solemnly, "In the records of a document in Asgard, there is a tree in the universe, which is as high as the sky, and 9 kingdoms are derived from this tree, namely, our 9 worlds. This kind of record is really too appalling, so in Asgard, it's just recorded as a strange story, and I only saw it by chance." After Wells finished speaking, he looked at the tree of life without saying a word. He knew that the tree of life must be related to the tree of the world in some sense. Maybe, the tree in front of him is the world tree in mythology. Jamal was silent for a while, and his face, which was already very vicissitudes of life, was now even more wrinkled. After a while, the giant tree slowly opened his mouth and said, "It's been a long time, tens of thousands of years? Or hundreds of thousands of years? I don't remember very clearly about the memory of the world tree, I only know that I used to be a member of the world tree." A twig. Wells blinked and was about to say something, "Senior." But at this moment, the giant tree suddenly interrupted Wells, "Don't talk about it, you help me solve a big trouble first." After the giant tree finished speaking, the face suddenly disappeared above the tree trunk, and at this moment, the sound of thunder sounded in the distance. Wells raised his head, and a black dragon with a height of several hundred meters appeared in the sky. "Big." Wells frowned. "Large lizard." "Roar!" The giant dragon seemed to hear Wells' words, it roared at Wells, and then, it spit out a blue flame. "It's actually magic." Seeing that the black dragon could actually spit out magic, Wells' pupils shrank. A magician is a very noble existence even in the 9 realms, and a giant dragon that knows magic is a very rare species. Wells' father, the former king of Asgard, Bor, his mount is nothing but a flying dragon, and the dragon in front of Wells at this time is incomparable. "Don't play magic with me." Wells raised his right hand, and the reality gem in his hand suddenly released a golden light. Bang! There was a harsh roar in the sky, and after the two powerful momentum confronted each other for a while, they disappeared in the sky again in an instant, but the forest under Wells' feet was half destroyed. The originally blue forest has also become black and charcoal. Reality gem. A roar suddenly sounded in the sky. "You actually have a reality gem in your hand." The dragon's voice was unbelievable, and at the same time, there was an undisguised greed in it. "What happened today?" Hearing the dragon's words, Wells frowned. The Infinity Stones were considered a big trump card for him, but today they were seen again and again. Row is that Wells is in a good mood, and at this moment he is also melancholy. The giant dragon had a big mouth and roared proudly, "In the beginning, I witnessed the powerful magic power of space gems with my own eyes, but now, someone has sent reality gems to my eyes again." Hearing the black dragon's words, Wells was startled. He asked the dragon loudly, "Have you seen other gems?" In the Marvel Universe, the gem that debuted for the first time was the Cosmic Rubik's Cube, Space Gem, which was collected by SHIELD, while other gems were scattered in every corner of the universe. Now that there are tens of thousands of years away from that era, even Wells, a traveler, cannot accurately judge where these gems are now. And this dark dragon actually saw other gems, which made Wells instantly excited. The 6 infinity gems are bug-like existences, each of which has unpredictable abilities. Wells only has one reality gem, and he already has the ability to traverse the 9 realms. If you add a space gem, then in the 9 realms, except for the adult Odin, he is an invincible existence. "Stop talking nonsense!" The dragon roared and charged towards Wells. "The gem is mine." Seeing the giant dragon rushing towards him, Wells' face turned cold. He raised his right hand, and wanted to use the reality gem to directly destroy the giant dragon. However, the reality gem didn't react at all. Seeing this, Wells' face was stunned. It was the first time he had seen such a situation after so many years. "Ha ha ha!" The dragon laughed wildly. "My blood is the blood of the dragon Nidhogg, and magic is useless to me." "Nidhogg? The giant dragon under the world tree?" Wells glanced at the giant dragon with wide eyes, as if he didn't expect this lizard to have such a history. "Okay, in that case." Wells quickly put away the reality gem, and his body also thumped after this moment, and the breath on his body shot straight into the sky, like a demon god. Wells doesn't only use reality gems. In addition to carrying reality gems, he also received the inheritance of Valhalla. Hit! Just as the dragon was about to rush down, Wells jumped directly into the air. He swept his legs straight into the dragon, and then Wells took advantage of his strength to come to the dragon's head, then he hit him hard. The dragon just wanted to say something, but Wells punched it on the head, and the 1,000 tons of pressure hit, and the dragon burst into tears. It ignored Wells on its head, flapped its wings and hurriedly flew to the ground. "Go! I'm darling!" Seeing that Wells defeated the dark dragon in just one round, the Tree of Life, who was watching the battle in the dark, said in disbelief, "That's the descendant of Nidhogg." Bang! The dark dragon's body slid in the forest for a while, and its huge body left a deep ravine on the ground. This shocking deep ravine stretched for hundreds of meters. Crack! Wells jumped off the dragon's head and looked at the destroyed forest. Wells shook his head. Lizard, can you make your body smaller? I am a giant dragon, a dark dragon, a descendant of the dragon Nidhogg, the most noble bloodline in the 9 realms. Hearing Wells' words, the dragon was furious, but before it could say anything, Wells raised his fist again. www.mtlnovel.com. Seeing this, the dragon had to obediently shut his mouth. Shoo! The dark dragon glanced at Wells angrily, and then a black light enveloped its whole body. Seeing this scene, Wells took a step back. Above this ray of light, Wells felt a very powerful dark magic, so powerful that it was terrifying. The black light disappeared, and a giant black dragon several feet in size appeared in Wells' eyes. Wells smiled slightly. Very well, that's right. Lizard, let me ask you one more question. Wells licked his lips and said with a serious face, is Nidhogg still alive? The unification of the 9 realms is inevitable in history, but if Nidhogg is still alive, even the current Odin will not be his opponent. At that time, I don't know how many warriors Asgard will use to destroy Nidhogg. Nidhogg! The dragon's eyes suddenly dimmed, and the arrogant look just now disappeared. It shook his head. It disappeared with the world tree. Hundreds of thousands of years, the dragons have not heard anything about it. Information. Kill him, young man, kill him. Seeing that Wells had knocked down the dark dragon to the ground, an old face appeared on the trunk of the Tree of Life again, and it said to Wells excitedly, it's because of him that I ended up where I am today. In fact, it is the enemy of my ancient Wood clan. Hearing the words of the Tree of Life, the dark dragon said angrily, old man, don't give me a big hat, our grievances have nothing to do with our ancestors, the reason why I bully you is just because you are easier to bully. Thanks for watching, please subscribe.